The entire church fell into a stunned silence the moment the wealthiest woman in the congregation pulled away from the pastor's outstretched hand. For a brief second, the pastor stood frozen, his hand suspended awkwardly in midair. A flicker crossed his face so quickly most people almost missed it. Then, without a single word, he withdrew his hand, turned away, and continued praying for the next person as if nothing unusual had happened. But everyone had seen it, and nobody could explain it. Just moments earlier, the atmosphere inside the church had been electric. In the middle of his sermon, the pastor had suddenly stopped speaking and stared into the crowd. "The Spirit of God is showing me an arrow of death moving through this congregation," he declared. Fear swept through the room instantly. A nervous murmur spread among the members as people exchanged worried glances. The pastor raised his voice again and announced that God had instructed him to lay hands on every person present to break every curse, cancel every evil attack, and destroy every spirit of untimely death. The choir immediately shifted into a slow, emotional worship song. Some people closed their eyes. Others knelt and began to cry. The entire sanctuary felt heavy with emotion. Yet among the crowd sat Mrs. Grace, one of the church's most respected members and its largest financial supporter. And for reasons she couldn't explain, a knot suddenly formed in her stomach. Then she heard it, not through her ears, inside her spirit. "Do not let him touch your head." Her eyes snapped open. She looked around nervously. Nobody else seemed disturbed. Everyone appeared deeply immersed in worship. Some were weeping. Others had their hands raised toward heaven. She swallowed hard. Maybe it was anxiety. Maybe she was imagining things. But the warning came again, clearer this time. "Do not receive the laying of hands." A chill raced through her body. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat as the pastor continued moving through the congregation, placing his hands on one person after another. Some collapsed to the floor. Others trembled as church workers rushed to cover them. The atmosphere grew more intense by the minute. Yet strangely, the stronger the service became, the more uneasy she felt. She lowered her head. "Lord, what's happening?" she whispered. She had attended this church for years. She wasn't just another member. She had helped fund countless church projects. People respected her. What would happen if she publicly rejected the pastor? The thought alone made her uncomfortable. People would misunderstand. The pastor might feel humiliated. For a moment, she considered allowing him to pray for her simply to avoid embarrassment.
Welcome to Wild Shadow Tales. Thank you for watching. Stay kind, stay human, and we'll see you very soon for another powerful stories.
She could always sort out her feelings later. But the instant that thought crossed her mind, something unexpected happened. A scripture flashed through her mind with startling clarity, almost as though someone had opened a Bible directly before her eyes. To obey is better than sacrifice. Her heartbeat quickened. Before she could fully process it, the pastor reached a row. One by one, he laid hands on the people seated beside her. Then he stopped directly in front of her. The room suddenly felt smaller. His hands slowly moved toward her forehead. At the last possible moment, Mrs. Grace leaned backward. The pastor's hand missed her completely. A collective gasp swept across the sanctuary. What just happened? Several people stared in disbelief. The rejection had been impossible to ignore. Yet what happened next disturbed her even more. The pastor didn't react. No correction, no anger, no question, nothing. He simply lowered his hand and moved to the next person. Almost too quickly, almost as though he had expected it. And somehow, that silence felt far more unsettling than any confrontation could have been. The service eventually ended, but the tension remained. Outside, whispers erupted immediately. Money has gotten into her head. She's becoming proud. How do you embarrass a man of God like that? The criticism spread rapidly. Some defended her, but most didn't. Mrs. Grace heard every word as she walked toward her car. Each whisper felt like a stone striking her chest. Yet despite the embarrassment and confusion, one thing remained strangely certain. Deep inside, she still believed she had done the right thing, and that certainty frightened her. That evening, she locked herself inside her bedroom and sat alone on the edge of her bed. Again and again, she replayed the incident. Why would God stop her from receiving prayer? Had she misunderstood something? Had fear deceived her? She buried her face in her hands and searched desperately for answers. But none came. Only the same warning echoed repeatedly within her spirit. The following Sunday, Mrs. Grace returned to church carrying a storm inside her mind. Throughout the drive, she questioned herself. Maybe she had overreacted. Maybe she had made a terrible mistake. The previous week's incident had already changed how people treated her. Some members avoided eye contact. Others greeted her coldly. A few stared openly, as though she had committed an unforgivable offense. Still, the uneasiness inside her remained. The service began normally. Then testimony time arrived. A man rushed excitedly toward the altar and grabbed the microphone. His voice trembled. Last Sunday, Papa warned us about an arrow of death. The congregation immediately grew silent. The man continued. 3 days later, I was involved in a terrible accident on the expressway. A hush fell over the church. The bus flipped several times. People died instantly. But somehow I walked away without a single broken bone. Gasps echoed through the sanctuary. Tears streamed down his face. I know it was the pastor's prayer that saved me. The church exploded into celebration. People shouted. Others cried. Many began speaking in tongues. The testimony shook everyone, including Mrs. Grace. For the first time, doubt crept into her heart. Had she been wrong? Had she ignored God's protection? Before she could answer those questions, the pastor returned to the altar. His expression was serious. The Spirit is showing me another arrow of death among us today. The room instantly tensed. Fear spread even faster than before. I will pray for everyone again. The choir resumed worship. This time people rushed forward eagerly. Nobody wanted to take chances. As the pastor moved through the rows, laying hands on member after member, Mrs. Grace bowed her head. Then suddenly, the voice returned. If you receive it, you will receive paper and call it money. Your life will become a struggle. Her eyes widened. A wave of fear gripped her chest. Not again. She couldn't bear another public rejection. Not after everything that had already happened. She held her Bible tightly and prayed under her breath. Lord, please show me the truth. Then it happened. Without warning, her spiritual eyes seemed to open. The sanctuary looked normal. The people looked normal. But every time the pastor stretched out his hand toward someone, she saw something horrifying. A massive serpent. Dark. Scaly. Its head appeared where his hand should have been. Each touch looked less like a blessing and more like a strike. Her blood ran cold. She blinked repeatedly. The vision remained. In fact, it became clearer. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She couldn't stay. While the congregation remained lost in prayer, she quietly grabbed her bag and slipped out of the row. She didn't stop moving until she reached her car. The moment she climbed inside, she locked every door and leaned back against the seat. Her hands were shaking. She couldn't even bring herself to start the engine. God, what is happening? She whispered. Nothing made sense anymore. This was the same church that had helped rebuild her life years ago. Back then, she had been drowning in debt. Her fabric business was collapsing. Bills piled up faster than she could pay them. Many nights, she cried herself to sleep wondering if she would lose everything. Then she joined the church, and little by little, doors began opening. Contracts appeared unexpectedly. Over the years, Mrs. Grace's life had transformed beyond anything she could have imagined. What began as a modest fabric shop had expanded into a network of import businesses, commercial properties, and investments spread across the country. Within a surprisingly short period, she had become one of the most successful women in the state. Wherever she went, people recognized her. Many admired her story. And throughout that entire journey, the pastor had always been present. He had prayed over her business when it was struggling. He had celebrated her victories when success finally arrived. In return, she gave generously. She funded church projects. She purchased the pastor's official vehicle. She paid school fees for struggling families. She helped members facing financial hardship. The church wasn't simply a place of worship anymore. It felt like home. which was exactly why none of this made sense. Why would God suddenly warn her about the very man she had trusted for years? Sitting alone in her car, she closed her eyes and tried to steady her thoughts. Then everything around her seemed to disappear. The parking lot faded, the sounds vanished, and suddenly another vision opened before her. This one was far darker. She found herself looking into a dimly lit room. Several men dressed in dark robes stood in a circle. Candles flickered along the walls. Strange chants echoed through the air. At the center of the room was the pastor, kneeling, head bowed, his face filled with desperation. Mrs. Grace felt her stomach tighten. The vision continued. Images began flashing rapidly before her eyes. The pastor praying alone late at night. The pastor begging for influence. The pastor pleading for larger crowds. The pastor demanding success before its appointed time. Then understanding flooded her spirit. He had grown impatient. Instead of waiting for God's timing, he had chosen a shortcut. A dangerous one. The revelation deepened. Now she saw him standing before church members, laying hands on them exactly as he did every Sunday. But something horrifying was happening. Each time his hand touched someone's forehead, streams of light seemed to leave that person. Some lost brilliant golden light. Others lost glowing streams that looked like favor, peace, wisdom, or strength. And every single stream flowed directly into him. Mrs. Grace covered her mouth. Her body trembled. The pastor wasn't giving. He was taking. The vision shifted again. Scriptures began flashing across her mind. Verses about authority, about spiritual ownership, about sealing, about identity, about the power connected to the head and forehead. Piece after piece suddenly fit together. Not every spiritual touch carried a blessing. Some hands released healing. Others transferred bondage. Some imparted life. Others quietly stole it. Tears filled her eyes as revelation after revelation poured into her spirit faster than she could process. The weight of it became overwhelming. For several minutes, she sat completely frozen. Then suddenly knock, knock, knock. Mrs. Grace jumped violently. A security guard stood outside her window. "Madam, could you please move forward? Another vehicle needs to pass." Instantly, the vision disappeared. The parking lot returned. The sounds returned. Reality rushed back. Her breathing was uneven. Her hands were trembling. Sweat covered her palms. She gripped the steering wheel tightly. "How could this be?" she whispered. "How could he do something like this?" Slowly, she started the engine and drove home. The entire journey passed in silence. That evening, she locked herself indoors. She spent hours praying, reading scripture, seeking clarity, but one question refused to leave her mind. Should she continue attending that church? Or was God telling her it was finally time to walk away? The following Sunday, her seat remained empty. For the first time in years, she wasn't there. People noticed immediately. Some were surprised. Others weren't. Rumors had already spread. Many assumed her wealth had finally made her arrogant. Yet something else stood out. The pastor never contacted her. Not once. No phone call. No message. No concern. One of the ministry's strongest supporters had vanished overnight. Yet he showed no interest in finding out why. Instead, church life continued as usual. And with each passing week, a troubling pattern emerged. One Sunday, the pastor announced that a spirit of sudden death was targeting families. Another week, he warned of terrible accidents approaching members. The following service, he declared that invisible arrows were attacking businesses, marriages, and finances. Fear slowly became part of the church culture. People arrived anxious. They left exhausted. Every service seemed to begin with a warning, and every warning ended with the same solution: the laying of hands. Members rushed forward desperately. Some cried before reaching the altar. Others shook uncontrollably. Nobody wanted to become the next victim of whatever danger had been announced that day. But beneath the surface, something else was happening. Something nobody recognized. People began losing things they couldn't explain. Favors started disappearing. Peace became harder to find. Businesses slowed unexpectedly. Doors that once opened effortlessly suddenly slammed shut. Joy faded. Motivation vanished. Progress stalled, yet nobody connected it to the church. How could they? The church appeared successful. Miracles still happened. Testimonies continued. Attendance kept growing, and the pastor's rise became almost unbelievable. 3 months after Mrs. Grace stopped attending, news spread that he had purchased another luxury vehicle. Then another. Shortly afterward, construction began on a massive new auditorium. Members celebrated enthusiastically. During every sermon, he preached about divine acceleration, supernatural favor, kingdom prosperity. Many believed God was simply blessing his servant. But hidden beneath the success was a darker reality. One businessman lost everything after making a series of disastrous decisions that made no sense. A successful woman watched major contracts disappear one after another. Several marriages became battlefields filled with constant arguments. Others experienced strange spiritual heaviness they couldn't explain. Yet suspicion never fell on the pastor. The church looked too successful. The evidence seemed too positive. What nobody understood was that their lives were being drained little by little, and the pastor's rapid rise was feeding on what was leaving them. One evening, after finishing a long business meeting, Mrs. Grace walked toward the gate of her office building. The sun was beginning to set. Employees were heading home. Then an elderly woman stepped into her path. She looked frail, exhausted, hungry. "Please help me buy something to eat," the woman said softly. Without hesitation, Mrs. Grace opened her purse and handed her some money. Normally, that would have been the end of it, but the woman didn't move. Instead, she stared directly into her eyes, and something about her expression changed. The air suddenly felt different, almost heavy. Then the woman spoke. "The hand that gathers glory cannot stop until the vessel is empty." Mrs. Grace froze. The old woman's voice sounded strange, ancient, like dry leaves scraping against stone. "The predator is still hungry." She paused, and it remembers the one who escaped. A cold sensation ran through Mrs. Grace's entire body. Her heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" she asked quickly. But before she could get another word out, the old woman turned away and disappeared into the evening crowd. Within seconds, she was gone, completely gone. Mrs. Grace stood motionless. The warning echoed inside her mind. This wasn't about the past. It was about what was coming next. That night, she prayed longer than ever before. The following day, she prayed even more. Soon she began fasting regularly, studying scripture for hours, removing every distraction she could. Deep inside, she felt danger approaching. And she was right. Far away from public view, the pastor was facing a crisis of his own. Inside a hidden meeting with the men he secretly served, tension filled the room. The atmosphere was no longer friendly, no longer celebratory. One of the leaders delivered shocking news. The spiritual harvest he had been bringing them was no longer sufficient. They wanted more, much more. At first, the pastor forced a nervous smile. Surely they were exaggerating. But nobody laughed. The room remained silent. Then one of the men leaned forward. "We require a greater sacrifice." The pastor's smile vanished. His stomach tightened. "What kind of sacrifice?" he asked quietly. The leader's eyes never left him. "Blood." The room seemed to grow colder. The pastor felt his heartbeat accelerate. Then the man spoke again. "Your wife." Silence. Another voice followed. "Or your first son." The pastor's face drained of color. For the first time in years, genuine fear entered his eyes. This wasn't what he had agreed to. All he wanted was influence, success, crowded services, luxury, recognition. He believed the arrangement would end with spiritual harvesting from church members. Nothing more. Desperately, he began pleading. "No." His voice shook. "No, this wasn't our agreement." The men exchanged amused glances. "You benefited from everything. I can't sacrifice my family." The room erupted into soft laughter. One of the leaders leaned closer. "Every word felt like a knife. Every mansion came through us. Every luxury car came through us. Every crowd that worships you came through us. Every miracle that made people fear you came through us." The pastor felt trapped. For the first time, he realized the terrifying truth. There was no way out, and the men sitting across from him knew it. Then a voice emerged from somewhere deep within the darkness. Cold, calm, absolute. Nobody leaves. The words echoed through the room like a final sentence. In that moment, the pastor finally understood the truth. He wasn't a partner. He was a prisoner. A wave of panic swept through him. If he walked away, he could lose everything he had spent years building. The wealth, the influence, the admiration, perhaps even his life. For days afterward, fear became his constant companion. Sleep abandoned him. Food lost its taste. Every time he looked at his wife, guilt tightened around his chest. Every time he saw his children, a voice inside reminded him what the cult leaders had demanded. Yet despite the fear, another emotion remained stronger. Greed. He had come too far. The expensive cars, the packed auditoriums, the luxury lifestyle. He couldn't imagine losing it all. Eventually, he made another offer. A desperate one. If he could not sacrifice someone from his own household, he would provide someone else. Someone powerful. Someone whose spiritual value carried unusual weight. And almost immediately, one name came to his mind. Mrs. Grace. The moment her name was mentioned, the men exchanged interested glances. To them, she was worth far more than an ordinary person. Her influence, her favor, her success, her spiritual strength. Everything about her made her valuable. From that moment forward, she was no longer simply a woman who had escaped deception. She became a target, and the man she once called spiritual father became her hunter. Soon afterward, church members began showing up at her home. At first, it seemed harmless. A few women from the prayer group arrived carrying fruit baskets and warm smiles. Assistant pastors started calling regularly. People who had ignored her for months suddenly became deeply concerned about her spiritual well-being. Their words sounded loving, but something underneath felt rehearsed. Calculated. Daddy has been praying for you. Daddy saw danger concerning your future. You need to return before it's too late. Others tried guilt instead. God planted you in this ministry. You shouldn't disconnect yourself. But Mrs. Grace had learned something important. Manipulation often wears the mask of concern. She remained respectful, polite, but she kept her distance. Then one evening, something happened that she had secretly been expecting. The pastor arrived at her mansion unannounced. The moment security informed her, a knot formed in her stomach. Part of her wanted to refuse the meeting entirely, but another part knew this confrontation had been inevitable. Sooner or later, they would have to face each other. She instructed security to let him in. A few minutes later, he entered her living room wearing the same gentle smile everyone loved. The same calm voice, the same fatherly demeanor. "My daughter," he said softly, "the church misses you." Mrs. Grace studied him carefully. Physically, nothing seemed unusual, but suddenly her spiritual sight opened again, and what she saw nearly stole her breath. Massive shadows moved behind him. Dark shapes shifted across the room. A giant serpent coiled around his body like living chains. Its eyes glowed with terrifying intelligence. Other figures stood silently beside him, watching, waiting. In the natural world, he appeared perfectly normal. The pastor continued speaking as though nothing was wrong. "I've been praying for you every day." Mrs. Grace remained silent, and he slowly stood to his feet. A strange tension filled the room. "Let me pray for you." He stretched out his hand, moving toward her forehead. This time, she didn't hesitate. She stepped backward. Her voice cut through the room like thunder. "Don't touch me." The pastor froze. For the first time, genuine shock appeared in his eyes. Mrs. Grace stared directly at him. No fear, no uncertainty, only conviction. "If you don't turn away from this path and return to God," she said firmly, "judgment is coming." The room fell silent. Something inside the pastor shifted. His carefully crafted mask cracked. Only for a second, but it was enough, because in that moment he realized something terrifying. She knew, not part of it, not pieces of it, everything. From that day forward, the pretending ended. The attacks began almost immediately. Night after night, Mrs. Grace experienced disturbing dreams. Dark figures chased her through unfamiliar places. Strange voices whispered threats. Sometimes she woke unable to move. Other nights, she sensed invisible presences standing beside her bed. Fear tried to surround her, but something unexpected happened. Instead of becoming weaker, she became stronger. Every attack pushed her closer to God. She prayed longer, fasted harder, studied scripture with renewed passion. And the deeper her faith grew, the less power fear had over her. The pastor, however, was becoming desperate. Since he could not reach her spiritually, pressure suddenly appeared elsewhere. Her finances. Major contracts disappeared without explanation. Business deals collapsed at the last minute. Imported goods became trapped at ports due to mysterious complications. Trusted partners betrayed her. Investments began failing one after another. Within months, enormous pressure surrounded her. Anyone else might have surrendered, but Mrs. Grace refused. She continued praying, continued believing, continued standing. Then one night, she had a dream unlike any she had experienced before. In the dream, she stood in a vast, dark landscape. The pastor stood opposite her. The atmosphere vibrated with tension. A fierce spiritual battle erupted. For a moment, it appeared he would overwhelm her. The darkness around him seemed enormous, ancient, powerful. But Mrs. Grace began praying, fiercely, relentlessly. The more she prayed, the weaker he became. His confidence disappeared. His strength faded. The darkness surrounding him started breaking apart. Then suddenly, brilliant light engulfed her. Power surged through every part of her being. The pastor screamed. The ground beneath him shattered, and he collapsed, motionless, defeated. Mrs. Grace woke up instantly. Her heart was racing. Sweat covered her body. The dream felt disturbingly real. But what she didn't know was that, at that exact moment, a different battle had already begun. Inside the pastor's household, the darkness he had served for years was becoming impatient, and it had decided to collect its debt. A few days later, tragedy struck. The pastor received a devastating phone call. His eldest son, studying overseas for a master's degree, had suddenly fallen critically ill. Doctors couldn't explain it. Every test created more questions. No clear diagnosis emerged. 3 days later, the young man was dead. The pastor was shattered, completely broken. For the first time in years, he truly felt fear. Not the fear he preached about. Real fear. The kind that keeps a person awake at night. The kind that destroys certainty. Yet the nightmare was only beginning. After the burial, strange events started occurring inside his home. His wife claimed she heard voices calling her name in the middle of the night. Doors opened on their own. Footsteps echoed through empty hallways. Dark shadows appeared in corners before vanishing. The mansion no longer felt like a home. It felt haunted by consequences. Nobody slept peacefully. Nobody felt safe. The same darkness he once directed toward others had finally crossed his own doorway. And that was when the pastor realized the most terrifying truth of all. He had never controlled the darkness. Not for a single day. He had only been useful to it. A tool. A servant. A temporary investment. And now, the bill had arrived. But by then, it was far too late. There was no escape route. No shortcut back. No easy way out. Still, he continued preaching. The church continued growing. Crowds became larger. His fame spread farther. New faces filled the auditorium every week while older members quietly disappeared. Some left because something never felt right. Others obeyed a warning they couldn't fully explain. But many remained. And every service followed the same pattern. Fear-filled prophecies, emotional atmospheres, urgent warnings, and the laying of hands. Yet behind every smile, every sermon, and every celebration, one terrifying reality haunted him day and night. Darkness never gives anything for free. Eventually, it always returns to collect its payment. And when it does, the price is far greater than anyone imagined. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to watch the next one, where truth, faith, and courage are tested in an even more shocking battle between light and darkness. Until next time, stay blessed, stay discerning, and goodbye.